Hello, 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 and welcome to Tuesday. This is the Iconic Production channel. I am JM. This is Behind the Screen, where we just step behind the GM screen. We talk game design, we talk adventures, we talk monster design, we just talk about gaming. And good morning to my good friend Bob Crumb. We were talking about Elden Ring just before we jumped on here. Bob is my pusher when it comes to Elden Ring. Which I am grateful for. I did not realize I would be grateful for, but thank you for that, Bob. Uh, Ben, good to see you this morning. I didn't realize that you saw this side of the 10 a.m. I'm glad to have you here, and I'm answering your question today, which brings us to what this episode of Behind the Screen is about. We talked about something called doing a campaign clinic. We had a bunch of people on the Discord asking questions, tossing out different ideas and things like that. And so we decided that we were going to talk about, just answer questions today. Rook, good to see you this morning. Thank you as always for the subs. That's amazing. Thanks to Bob Crumb for suggesting that I figure out how to put this. No, I'm still not pointing to the right side of the screen. There we go. Our little tip jar over here. So we're going to get right into it. I have a lot of questions. This may actually be a multi-part campaign clinic because so many people have been asking questions that it has been wonderful. The Dawn Star is not a myth. It is not. It rises every day and blesses us with its light before dying at night and traveling through the underworld. Reenacting every day the great myth of the slaying of Yelm and his return during the God time. Bob, thanks for the bits, sir. That's amazing. All right, so let's start off. Bob had some questions. We're going to start here. We're going to actually start talking about 5th edition D&D. Yeah, do not look directly at the Dawn Star, Ben. We're going to talk about 5th edition D&D here to start because there's a lot of questions that kind of revolved around 5th edition. We're going to start with 3 and possibly get to a question about Shadowrun and campaign prep burnout. But we're going to start here. So my good friend Mr. Bob Crumb here in the chat was like, "Hey, I've got some spells that are bothering me in my D&D game. There are 3 of them, a trio of problematic spells in the game." So how do we deal with these? Well, one, remember, the spells in the player's handbook does not mean they are always available to everyone at all times, right? There are certain things like cleric spells where they say they have the whole spell list, but there's nothing that says you can't customize a spell list by deity. This is a throwback to the old OSR version of gaming, right? That's how we would handle that, right? You would have spells that only certain gods didn't have access to certain spells. You had like major and minor spheres of influence. There's also the fact that you could, on your next campaign, identify your problematic spells and just say, these ones have to be found out in the wild in spell books. But in the middle of a current campaign, it's kind of hard to deal with that. Hey, Padre, good to see you. I think Padre's right. I think all players are difficult. So the trio of spells we're going to look at are, screw this, it is Leomund's Tiny Hut. It is not just Tiny Hut. I'm looking at you, Tiny Hut. Tiny Hut, Goodberry, and the Hunger of Hadar. It's funny to me, and I wonder if it's because it's the SRD version that Leomund is removed from Tiny Hut, but in the other website that I went to, the Hunger of Hadar is available for the name of the spellcaster is still attached to it, which reminds me of Matt Colville had this great video that inspired me. The idea that Mordenkainen spells, the named spells, are the newest spells that have been added into the D&D world's repertoire. Because Fireball, nobody remembers that guy's name anymore. It's probably something like Roger, which is why no one remembers it. But Mordenkainen knew enough in recent history to kind of add that. Which also means that it's interesting to in my second edition game, I actually have a list of spellcasters. So when wizards find spell books, I roll randomly and then change the effects slightly so that it's not just uh, magic missile. This is Leandra's Fey darts, and so it has a slightly different uh, effect. Felix or Nigel, I think, created some of that. That's now canon, Bob. They were the original dynamic duo of mage creation. So Leomund's tiny hut is it's a way to get a long rest in a dungeon, right? 10-foot radius, immobile dome of force. Takes a minute to cast. It lasts 8 hours. It basically allows you to, as long as you have the space, create a place to take a long rest. And that is something that the designers stated they did not want to have in 5th edition. They did not want to have the wizard workday, right? Where basically, hey, I'm out of spells, quick, let's rest for 8 hours and get back to dungeoneering. So this spell is worded very well, right? There's no way like an ethereal creature can get in, or that other creatures can enter this dome. However, it does say all other creatures are barred from it. Spells and other magical effects cannot extend through the dome or be cast through it. Until the spell ends, you can command the interior to be dimly lit or dark. The dome is opaque from outside at any color you choose, but is transparent on the inside. That's where I would, right, assuming that I haven't removed the spell from the game for the campaign, or said that it is a remote spell, or that I've talked with my players and said, hey, guys, this can really break the game. What are your thoughts about changing it a little bit? The thing that comes to my mind is that it's not an invisibility spell. The dome is visible. So the thing is, and this is in Jackals for a very important reason. There's the Jackal's ability or stat called Kleos. The more you adventure, the more people like are aware of you. And that's so that the enemies learn how the players are playing. It represents a reason why this would work. And so, in my mind, there's nothing to say that, like, hey, Leomund's tiny hut is a staple of adventure. So when monsters go, huh, check out that thing, that probably means there's a group of people hiding inside it waiting to kill us. Now, sure, you can dispel magic. You can do that. I think the first time you do a dispel magic on a tiny hut, it will definitely increase the tension about possibly using it again. The other thing that could be just a delightful way to ramp up the tension and point out that this may not be the catch-all that they assume it is. There's nothing that says you can't dispel tiny hut, Bob, at all. The other thing that I think would be delightful is there's nothing that says, remember, spells can't be cast through it. So that goblin shaman that just has a couple of darknesses a day cast darkness around Leomund's tiny hut. Suddenly the lights go out. Suddenly they can hear things, heavy things, scraping along the stones outside their hut. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's Tucker's kobold setting up a couple of ballista to ambush the players when they come out of it. Maybe it's disguising a trio of trolls that they've brought up from deeper in the dungeon and keep them hidden until they come out. Also, there's nothing that says it can't just be a single kobold with a accordion and drum set stapled to it, preventing them from actually resting because they know the people on the inside are trying to sleep. You know, kind of the noisy neighbor effect. So that's how I would handle it. If you guys have other ideas on how to handle it, put it in the comments. Now, Bob's next spell, like I said, a trio, is Goodberry. So, Bob, here's my question. Is it the fact that it restores 10 hit points or the fact that it provides nourishment for one creature for a day? You cannot see through magical darkness without like true seeing. So magical darkness, dark vision doesn't do anything. So, and they can't cast light to dispel it because no spells can go through the dome. They're just stuck around. So here's the thing. Yeah, I see your point, Bob. It ruins the economy of pushing players past their limits and requiring them to kind of rely on supplies. But there are other ways to do that, right? If they have Goodberry, it is a first level druid spell that's sort of like the first that ranger ability that says you can always find food in the wilderness. Well, that's cool, but it sort of undercuts one of the points of the exploration pillar. So what I would do is, I mean, honestly, it's a first level spell. If they want to waste a first level spell slot on just being able to, not eat for a day, all right. Like, what's interesting to me is that, okay, there it goes. I was like, duration instantaneous, but the magic lasts for the duration. There it goes. If they haven't been consumed within 24 hours, they lose the casting of the spell. So if a player group has Goodberry, I would actually argue that what you then want to do is push on the fatigue. So maybe they don't have to carry food. Maybe they don't have to worry about the economy of food. But man, that just means they're going to push themselves harder. And exhaustion levels are actually an underutilized and brutal fact of fifth edition, in my opinion. Um, just remember to look at the exhaustion rules. They stack. They apply in really weird cases that I sometimes forget. I think if you come back from 0 hit points, you can have exhaustion, or that just may be a Josh rule. But yeah, exhaustion is nasty, and yeah, I don't know. For me, I feel like for a first level spell, it's way easy. It's a truly magical effect. So I realize that one's not as helpful, Bob, but I would lean into. Um, Here's the thing: it also doesn't say that it has anything to do with water, so you may be able to lean into the water side of things. Yeah, out of the abyss. Out of the abyss is just exhaustive. Like I think I took levels of exhaustion playing through out of the abyss. Um, but yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And so the final one we're going to look at is, and this one, I hate to tell you this, Bob, but this is like my go-to spell uh, when I am playing a warlock, and that is, let me see if I can do this correctly. The Hunger of Adar. So this one it's a third level spell. It is a pain in the butt for DMs. I get that. You open this, I mean, it's very thematic. You open this gateway between the stars, there's unknown horrors. It's a 20-foot radius of sphere of blackness. Bitter cold appears, centered on a point within range, lasting for the duration. Um, no light, magical or other lights can illuminate the area, and creatures are fully blinded within the area. So one, remember, yes, it's cool. You throw it down and it attacks everyone in there. But none of your allies can attack those people because it's pitch black inside, no light whatsoever, magical or otherwise. So that's kind of up to the DM on how the dark vision interacts with that. I would argue that if it says no magical light can be seen, can illuminate the area, and that blind sight would probably work within there. Blind sight, I don't. Do they have tremor sense in fifth edition? That was a. We would have to look up blind sight, Bob. Rook, you play a lot of fifth edition. Blind sight, would that work within the Hunger of Hadar? Um, and then yeah, I mean, but the thing is, it is fixed, so it's nasty, right? Can you move it? You can't move it. So essentially, you create this 20-foot radius spell that blocks line of sight, unless your players have true sight. And it's a third level spell. It is potent, but again, if you can get out of there, teleportation works with creatures. I do think it's difficult terrain, so it takes like a full action. But again, against some of these creatures where they're taking, well, I mean, it's 2d6. So yeah, it's a grind spell. It So can a mage with blind sight fire into the sphere from outside? Well, let's take a look here, Bob. And then we'll get to the next question. Blind sight, 5e. Without relying on sight within a specific radius. How far is their blind sight? Is the question. Because again, it's a 20-foot radius. It would definitely, unless they're blind sight, unless they're right on the edge of that thing, it could. Okay, yeah, 10 feet. They would have to be within that sphere in order to target a creature in that sphere. And then they're taking damage. It doesn't differentiate between friend or foe. Right? You are summoning Cthulhian monsters. Right, they would have to, but I mean, it's a 20-foot radius. So that gives them, in theory, they don't know where the creatures are if they're moving around. If they're not within 10 feet, they would actually have to step into the radius and get within the slurping tendrils portion of that spell. Any creature. So yeah, it doesn't affect, or it affects allies is what I'm trying to get out. So those are some spells. Hopefully that's helpful, Bob. I enjoyed kind of looking at this and really digging into it. It was a good refresher course on a lot of these spells. So Rook had another 5th edition question that says his problem with 5e is that a game of 5e loses viability. Yeah, I got another. I'm going to do another one of these on Fridays or Thursday. So send me more questions. No game of 5e is viable past 5th or 6th level, in his opinion, and I get that. There is a sweet spot for 5th edition D&D, and I've run 3 campaigns all the way up to 20, and usually by about level 8, I stop ignoring any encounter. Like hard is where the encounters start, and they go up from there. I go hard, deadly, and then 2 or 3 times the XP for deadly, and usually my players can survive it. One of the ways that I've been looking at for my next 5e campaign, I'm wanting to set one in a single city. I've been looking at the 5e hardcore mode Rook and Deathbringer by Professor Dungeon Master. And what seems to be a simple change is removing the Constitution bonus from all hit points, both on the player side and on the monster side. That seems to be something that a lot of people are doing to make fights go faster. I don't know if that's necessarily your problem, or if your problem is that about 8th, 9th, or 10th level, you jump in power scale. It is rough, Bob, but if you remember, like in old D&D, all the way through 2nd edition, you stop gaining hit dice at like level 9 or 10. I mean, that's another thing that you could do. You could say, okay, no more hit dice added to your hit points as of level 9 or 10. You just get a flat bonus. Maybe your con bonus, maybe your 2 per level unless you're paladin, fighter, barbarian, and then it's 4 per level, something like that. The other thing that you could always do is just run a campaign from 1 to 8 or 10. If you went milestones or you went like strict XP, that's still a couple of really good years of gaming. And then you just reset. You don't allow the heroes to kind of jump into that epic tier of monster. So those are a couple of ways that you could, in my mind, fix the power creep problem. Also, if you just add in something like bring spell books back. Like, you can't just learn new spells. You actually have to go out and adventure them. Another flip side is a rule that Josh uses in Gebercan that I really, really like, where Josh says you can spend hit dice to avoid random encounters. Like, the group all has to toss in X number for an easy, X number, Y number for a medium, X number for a hard. And essentially, what it allows you to do is push your characters beyond the, past their normal endurance point. But you're still draining a resource, but they're able to avoid some of these smaller encounters. Issue with 5e is that Torg and Savage Worlds have better player options. I prefer to have players to have the ability to succeed if you want. Yes, I agree. You have things like bennies, you have the way the wounds interact. Torg and Savage Worlds, a lot of the mechanics I love are very similar between the two. The way interaction attacks work, the way bennies work, and the way wounds work are all very similar. But here's the thing with that, Padre. You've got the fact that both of those games, in theory, doesn't matter how high you get level-wise, you got 4 wounds, 3 or 4 wounds. That's it. Yet you get more and more resilient. You're right. Shane was very integral in the Torg Eternity redesign, and yeah, Savage Worlds is just. I'm actually reading through some Savage Worlds books now. So yeah, I think what Restar is saying, Bob, is almost like a legacy where you run through 10th level, and then your characters retire, right? Because if you remember, right around 9th or 10th level in the olden days is where you had a keep and you would settle down. And then you move to the next generation and you say, okay, cool. Now we're going to jump ahead a couple of years. Maybe the threats have gotten worse. Let the characters narrate get strongholds and followers and kingdoms and warfare. And those people are now at the new tier while the new characters are running through their rope. Oh, Padre, you didn't derail the discussion at all. This is what this is. This is sort of a forum-based character creation, or not character creation, clinic where we just talk about games and see it. So this, you are right on, like spot on. The other thing I really like, sorry, I'm gonna continue on this digression, and this is important for you, Bob. So I love that Savage Worlds actually has 3 ways to run combat. You've got like tactical combat where you break up the maps and the minis. You can do theater of the mind combat, and then they have quick resolution where you boil it down to 1 or 2 rolls, and then you move on to the next scene. And so depending on what the game is at, the group's at, I think what I'm going to do for my next Savage game is run a lot of quick combats, use the quick encounter rules, except for like the act set pieces where we really just go nuts with all of the combat. Would that disappoint you if you could never attain the upper spells, skills, etc.? I don't know. It all depends on your gaming group. So the Deathbringer rules has some interesting ways that they handle that. And essentially, one of the things is they're like, listen, most of the monsters you're going to encounter are going to be humans, just reskinned, because it makes it more of an old world kind of Warhammer-y feel. I think that is something to discuss with your players at session 0. Be like, hey, this game is only going to run through 10 because of X, Y, and Z. And maybe when you get to 10, you change it, or you go, hey, if you want to run 11 through 20, that's on you now. I'm going to be a player in this one. But yeah, like Restar said, you can hand down cool artifacts down to the next generation. You can like maybe every player gets to pick one thing that is unresolved from the first campaign, and they've raised their children to go take care of it. That necromancer in the Upland March, we've never been able to deal with it. Like, we're now running a kingdom, but you know what, you guys go do this. We've trained you your entire life. Or as Ben Feehan would say, you've been trained on the side of a mountain for 7 years to do this. That was his Pathfinder 2 character. Every chance he got, he reminded everyone he was raised on a monastery on the side of the mountain for 7 years. All right, so seeing as Ben I got time for one more. Restar, you're here, so we're gonna do your question. And Ben Feehan, if you're here on Thursday, your question will be next. So yeah, Bob, I do like the idea of legacy gear. Is really cool. And there was a great third edition book called, I think, Weapons of Legacy, um, where the idea was when you get handed down a weapon or you find an old weapon, maybe your father's sword is only a +1 sword in your hand until you unlock it. So you could even give really powerful weapons down to the players and go, hey, for you it's just a +1 weapon, but maybe if you're worthy of your father's legacy and you come up with 5 or 6 things that the players could do to unlock the next ability, so that eventually they're wielding the +5 Holy Avenger that their paladin was carrying, their paladin father. Or, ooh, this is a cool idea. Maybe when they hand it down, they unlock it, but every player gets to add a new ability to the weapon or the item, so that every next generation, that weapon of the Van Dorn family gets more and more powerful the longer it's wielded by members of the Van Dorn estate, if you will. All right, so for our final question here, Restar, who's in the chat, asked, how would I fix Shadowrun? Which is such a broad question that I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. And by the way, I still have 2, 4, 6. I got 8 questions for Thursday. We may do another campaign clinic on Thursday because there's just a lot of really good questions. Rook asked a couple of them. Ben Restar does. Bob's going to give me a question on Reach to answer. But how do I fix Shadowrun? Well, there's 2 ways to look at this. Let's start with the information overload for new players. If that's what we're talking about, then it's real simple. You come up with, and I have yet to see, and this could exist in 6th edition, I do not know. I stopped playing after 5th edition. 4th edition was kind of my 4th edition and 20th anniversary were kind of peak Shadowrun for me because they leaned into the heroic nature of Shadowrunners, which I really liked. 5th edition added a bunch of great simulation rules, but brought it back into like the grittiness, which is just not something I've ever really enjoyed. I still want my Shadowrunners to be heroes at the end of the day. Ooh, a Savage World. There you go. Padre solved it for us. Just port it to Savage Worlds. I'm sure they're going to, with the new superhero companion that's coming out, Padre, and the new fantasy companion, you could do that pretty simply, I think. That's a good, when in doubt, run it in Torque. No. I've not seen this as a good adventure, but there used to be one called First Run. And the idea with that is you set up your intro adventure with maybe like your first series of runs, very simply. The best example I've ever seen of this is the new Delta Green has a control group adventure, where each adventure only introduces 1 rule of Delta Green. So... and then like a 75% mortality rate. And the idea is you play through each of the intro adventures, gathering the group that will be your Delta Green group. But I would say, you start off just explaining how skills work. Then that's session 1. How do skills work? What do you guys want to do? Maybe skills and legwork. Kind of introduce, hey, you're people who are being hired to do illegal activities for corporations that need plausible deniability. Session 1 is only skills, because it's a weird system, especially with things like limits. And so yeah, I would break down each of the big rules chapters into 1 adventure. So step 1, we're gonna explain how skills work. That's it. You just need to know how skills work. You need to know how edge works at the end of this adventure. Then we do a soft fight. Take what we learned in session 1, let's build on it with mechanics. And this is how I introduce essentially any new game system. Then then in our 3rd session, let's look at magic. Kind of keep building up magic, shamanism, maybe hacking if you have a hacker. Hacking has always been like the big oversight in in Shadowrun. The fact that they made hacking real time in fourth edition as opposed to like 1/6 time as it was in third was a huge improvement. So that's what I do. I would gatekeep all of the complexity and take the first run and just script it out a bit and say, these are the 4 sessions we're going to play through. You're going to learn how skills work at Edge in the first one. You're going to learn combat in the second one. We're going to cover magic and hacking as it is needed, because you may not have people in the group who need that. And then the last one, we're going to do a chase scene. Maybe like your Mr. Johnson screws you over at the end, because that's something also that has to be learned in Shadowrun. I've never had a problem explaining Shadowrun as a setting to players, because Cyberpunk plus Tolkien seems to resonate. And now that we have shows like Altered Carbon and things like that, it's a lot easier for a cultural touchstone for that. But I will say that you got to know your group, because Shadowrun is a super crunchy system. I don't necessarily think that's broken, but I do think that you need to like understand that the game is just rough. Now I haven't looked at it, but they do have something called Shadowrun Anarchy, which is apparently a far more narrative version of the rule set. That may be something to do, or as Padre pointed out, I mean, Ben, you're a Torg player. You've got the Cyber Papacy rules, and you've got the Isle rules. You got your Shadowrun system right there. I mean, you could literally ignore every other Cosm and just use those 2 rule books, mash them together, and run it in the 6th world, and you've got a great game. You got all the cybernetics that you need. You got all the magic that you need. You got all the fantasy races that you need. You might have to build trolls and orcs, possibly. But the other thing is, in a really crunchy game like Shadowrun, the rules are hard. I think making a cheat sheet for your players, like a general cheat sheet, here's how skills work, here's how combat works, and then making a specialized one for the players, and then go, this is all that I know. Everything else that you do is on you, and you need to learn the rules. I've never had a problem pushing back against the players and saying, listen, this is a lot. Like, when I ran Shadowrun, I did it possibly the dumbest thing I could have done, and Bob Crum will remember this. I ran for like 9 players. The overload was real. But I had 2 players in the group who loved Shadowrun. And I was able to lean on one of the players who was our hacker for all of the hacking things. He had been playing Shadowrun since 2nd edition. I was able to lean on the other player for all of the weird, obscure combat rules, because he was a combat junkie in Shadowrun. So really, that just left magic, which was always my favorite. And I just ran magic. Oh man, Bob, your character and your interaction with Trisha's character, and yeah, we ran Harlequin and Harlequin's back, and it was just 2 of my favorite adventures, because the link between Earthdawn and Shadowrun is just spectacular. But yeah, Torg would be a great system to run it in, and again, you have everything that you need there. Well, I apologize to everyone whose questions we didn't get to. Rook, I tried to get one from you, one from Ben, one from Bob. We'll cover a ton of the other questions next week, or on Thursday. We've got questions from Rook. So some of the ones we're going to talk about is, how do you make critical hits of any sort more memorable? How do you deal with game prep burnout? How do you deal with the problem of players getting rid of the big bad too easily? So those are just some of the ones we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Reach in 5th edition because of Bob's question. So check out all of the other great shows that we have on the Iconic Production channel. We'll be back tonight at 7:30 with more Torg. And for those of you who have commented on the sound, I think we fixed it. It was a program that was burying gain control and just would not allow us to change it. We're going to be back on Thursday with more Behind the Screen. We're going to talk more about the campaign clinic. And this Sunday is the third Sunday of the month. So we will be going live with the Iconic podcast at 7 o'clock Central and talking about. It's the weird month where Sunday's the first, May 1st was a Sunday. We're going to be talking about Trail of Cthulhu's Hideous Creatures, which is their bestiary for Trail of Cthulhu, and Eternal Lies, which is the big campaign. So if you're free on Sunday night and want to come and hang out and talk Cthulhu and gumshoe with us, please do. And remember, that one is only live on Twitch the night it goes live, and then it goes to our podcast streams. So to everyone who has joined me, my great thanks, and I will see you all on Thursday for the second part of this campaign clinic, and we will see you then. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I'm JM, and this has been Behind the Screen.